if you've ever flown goshawks, like in cover, sometimes they lift their head up. It's like a periscope, and you can see them. They look, and then they make a decision at that point. And she put her head up, and she's looking at the jackrabbit, and she just poured the speed on and just like went right past the dog and like grabbed the rabbit, and it was just like this big ball of dust and grass flying in the air.
And welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, brought to you in part by the fine folks at Marshall Radio Telemetry, the makers of the most carefully engineered and reliable tracking systems available, including the awesome GPS system. For more information on Marshall Radio or their products, just head to marshallradio.com. And also the Falconry Fund, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting and protecting the various arts and practices of falconry and the cultural and environmental assets that make it possible. For more information on the Falconry Fund or to donate, just head to falconryfund.org. So earlier this year, I was contacted by Paul Domski, and he is a member of the New Mexico Falconers Association. He contacted me earlier this year to see if I could possibly do a series of episodes for the association and, kind of feature some of the older members in particular that have been in the state for a long time and have made other contributions to the sport. So I told him, sure, I was definitely interested, and if we could work out the travel logistics and all that, I'd be more than happy to swing down and stay down there for a few days and record a series of podcasts for them. And it was a lot of fun. I'm glad that we could work it out despite several different scheduling hiccups along the way. But overall, I thought that there was a lot of cool stuff that we were able to kind of talk about and get recorded. And so the next roughly, 5 or 6 episodes are going to be kind of a New Mexico Falconers Association sponsored series of podcasts, and hopefully we can continue to do this with more state clubs in the future, because it really is a great method of archiving and documenting the different voices that have helped grow and evolve different state clubs, and that can discuss at one time just the different changes that have happened in some cases over the series of decades with different states. So if any state clubs are listening to this and want to make this happen, just feel free to hit us up, and I'm sure we can figure something out if you're interested. We would definitely love to help you get your stories and documented histories of the evolution of your clubs out there if that's something that you're interested in doing. So anyway, without further ado, I think it's time to go ahead and just turn things over to the conversation that I had with Paul Domski, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks again for joining us for another episode, and enjoy. And we are a go. So now we are recording out in Paul Domski's, let's see, what do you call this? Your barn, your spare house. What's the official name for this place again?
Well, we call it the building. My good buddy Greg Pinkston calls it the Tough Shed.
Okay. Well, that's a interesting name, but this is also where I have slept the past couple of nights, and it's a nice cozy place. It's this is your.
It's all right. Yeah.
Your equivalent to, I guess it would be Tom Smiley's man cave where we recorded earlier today, right?
Yeah, it's kind of my man cave. I mean, it doubles as a place to accumulate all kinds of random crap, and where I sit and make hoods when I'm making hoods.
Nice, and I do see a lot of hood making paraphernalia laying around here. And how long have you been making these, by the way?
I made my first hood when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I got out of the back of Field and Stream. There was this little pamphlet that was for sale for $1, and my mom was really generous to me. This was back in the 1974, 73, 74 time frame, and she ordered it for me, and it had a little pattern for an Anglo-Indian hood, and I sewed up my I cut the pattern out, and I made a couple of Anglo-Indian hoods. Of course, I had no idea what I was doing, or even the pattern was so sort of abstract to me. As a kid, it's like, I don't know exactly what this is. And, talking to my mom and my dad, and they're like, well, I think you need to sew or along these lines here and make a hood. But yeah, those were my first hoods. And then, when I became a falconer back around 1999, I sort of picked up where I left off and, started with Anglo-Indian hoods and quickly progressed to making Dutch hoods and making my own sort of attempts at making blocks. I'd never seen a hood block at the time. And, over the years, I've made my own blocks and acquired blocks from different falconers. They've sent them to me, and here I am, sort of a semi-okay hood maker.
Semi-okay? Well, from the response that you got whenever you just posted recently, it seems like you might be better than, semi-okay, but, like I said, I'm going to get one from you too, or a couple, or, whatever. So I hope you're better than just, semi-okay, but, it's the modesty. I like modesty in people in general, so that's good.
Well, I don't make hoods with a lot of bling. My big influences on making hoods are Doug Pinio. I met Doug early on, I think at a NAFA meet in Amarillo around 2000 or something, and my sponsor was Tom Smiley, and Tom always said, Doug makes, he's the master, the Gucci of hood makers, and I went out of my way to really try to get in Doug's face. He probably may not even remember me at that time, but Doug was a huge influence on my hood making, and he gave me so many tips over the years and on his methods and ways of making hoods, and I aspire to make a hood that's maybe 50% of a Doug Pinio hood one day.
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. Like I said, it's always good to to keep those humble qualities, and I always like talking to other hood makers, and it's something that I know that I'll never have the dexterity nor the patience, or just honestly just the I don't have the desire at all to even remotely kind of get into that world.
Yeah. So
I admire anyone that does, and I like collecting hoods as well as using them for practical purposes.
Sure.
It's another one of those dumpster fire kind of hobbies to get into. You can lose a lot of money quick.
Yeah, that's a fact. No doubt. There's so many great hood makers out there anymore.
Yeah.
It truly is amazing. Bill Barber and Chris Proctor, those guys are amazing. And Steve Tate is a hood god. And, and there's, if you're on social media, you can look around, and there's guys from Spain who just, who make works of art out of every hood they make. All I try to do is make hoods that fit and are comfortable for the bird, and that tend to last a long time, and, it's a relatively, maybe modest goal, but it's something, I think for me that's about where I'm at. So, and I enjoy it, I really do.
Well, if you're not enjoying anything that you're doing, there's no point in doing it for the most part.
Exactly.
Unless you just have to make money and you get roped into a certain level of income, which,
Yeah, God, no. Making money off of making hoods, it would be, that certainly isn't a way. I kind of put out the little ad to make a couple hoods to pay for a bird, but then I got, careful what you wish for, right? Mm-hmm. I got a bunch of orders in, so now I'm working, diligently to fill the orders. It's fun. I really do enjoy it because it gives me a chance to go back and sit down and make a bunch of hoods and improve on each one, and I just like it,
Yeah.
Handiwork.
Well, I mean, we already established once I got here that my order was the most important so far in the
well, of course,
the order of relevance.
Of course, you know.
No, it's all good. I know you'll get to them all eventually, but no, I mean, like I said, the some of the other guys that I've known and that have made hoods. Eventually it seems like a lot of guys end up getting burnt out on it and end up having to take breaks or stop doing it. I mean, it's a good thing you still enjoy doing it, even though it seems like...
No, I could never make hoods at that level. I'm not a production kind of guy, and I'm more of a craftsman. I like to make sure that the beak openings are good and to what I consider good, and that the hood fits, and that's... if somebody doesn't like the way a hood fits, I'll take it back and we'll start over again. So,
well, that's good. I mean, you kind of almost have to.
Yeah.
It's going into this, that's something you almost kind of go into it knowing you end up having to do for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's like I don't know if maybe it was Steve Bodio in one of his essays somewhere along the line wrote about fly fishermen, they in the off season they're busy tying flies. And hood making for me is something I always get into in the late summer, and then like by November I don't want to deal with it anymore because it's like now I just want to be flying my birds, and like I think Steve Bodio made some comparison with tying flies, and during the off season, hardcore fly fishermen are busy tying their flies just sort of to keep them in the game for the season that's coming, and I'm kind of the same way in that respect.
Yeah, no, I mean that's understandable. Yeah. I mean it's no different than some guys that, well, I mean there's guys that love to fly micros in the off season, the springtime and stuff, so they don't ever get out of the game at all. And I mean, I guess it's no different than anything else. I guess you just want to keep doing it. I mean, there's plenty of guys that also just don't want to have a damn thing to do about it. don't want anything to do whatsoever with falconry during the off season too, just because they need their break. But
try to reestablish the relationship with their family.
Just make sure that the divorce settlement goes through okay, and they're not going to be out too much money. And
God forbid.
That's cool though. I'm glad that. I mean, that's a long time to really be practicing this though. I mean, 12 or 13 years old is a pretty young...
Well, yeah, I mean, I made my first couple of hoods when I still have one somewhere in a box around here, but I mean, obviously I was obsessed with falconry when I was a kid, and I went through the normal North American sort of cycle, my side of the mountain, and a neighbor happened to have a fledged kestrel fall down their chimney when I was, 12 years old. And I was, when I saw that thing, the guy had it in a box and he showed it to my dad and myself. And, the look of wildness in that bird's eye, I was like, that was it. At that point, it seemed like predetermination at that point. And, the guy gave us the kestrel, and I was a stupid kid, and there was no information available at the time, and it lived for 6 months, and I feel bad about it still, but later on when I was in high school, I found a young great horned owl, and I raised it up, and then hacked it back. My parents had this little cottage up on this lake up in the upstate New York, excuse me, and that bird was super cool because I used to walk around in the woods during the day, and it would follow me from tree to tree. And, it ended up, there was a lot of skunks around, and great horned owls are notorious for catching skunks. And it became a proficient skunk killer in our neighborhood. And so I know it turned out okay. And, that was when I was like on 9th or 10th grade or something like that. And as you're a young guy and you're busy with school and other interests start to encroach, and I mean, I didn't get really back into the whole falconry thing until I was I was like 36, 37, so like 20 some years ago now. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, I mean, ironically, you probably had more success with a great horned owl at that point in time than that a lot of guys that have tried it have had. But yeah, I mean, it's like I said, the fact that you also didn't know anything and kept a kestrel alive for 6 months. In retrospect, I mean, obviously you can look at that however you want, but the fact that it lived 6 months instead of 2 days or whatever is not.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. I was when I finally took the plunge, when I finally figured out this is where I was at. I was reluctant to tell my sponsor. I was reluctant to tell Tom Smiley about that whole episode because I was so embarrassed about it. But
before there were regs and before there was really a lot of rules and information, especially in our country, though. I mean,
sure.
You can view it however you want, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that kind of stuff is how a lot of guys got their start.
I know. And since then I've heard so many stories, so I've finally overcome that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that we're condoning it; we're just stating facts.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, I mean, and it's a real shame that kids today, that there's so many restrictions on handling animals from the wild. Whether it's a raccoon that someone traps, or catches down at the stream, a baby raccoon, or or raising up a robin that fell out of the nest. I mean, people miss out on so much because it's so regulated, and people have become so urbanized that, bringing anything from the outdoors inside just seems so foreign anymore. I mean, I grew up in a world where, we had, I was obsessed with a kid, as a kid, to, we hatched out ducks in the house. And it's kind of funny, because we had all these things, and then here I am as an adult, and it's like, rabbits, ducks. So it's like, those are the things I want to catch with my hawk, Yeah. But I think a lot of it, it's sad because the younger generations, I mean, I think are kind of miss out because they're so far removed from the wild.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean that's one, like, well, take my kid for example. He doesn't care about any of this stuff. He's like most falconry kids that that grow up with this stuff. They could care less.
Yep.
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's definitely, we all know people whose kids ended up getting into it, but it seems like they're definitely the minority.
Sure.
But I am glad that my kid got involved in something like scouts and stuff.
Yep.
So he at least has some degree of I don't know, relationship, I guess, with nature.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, it really is easy for people to miss out on all aspects of any of this kind of stuff.
Sure.
That's why there's so much misinformation or just lack of knowledge in general about, birds as a whole, not just birds of prey. But yeah, no, I feel you.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, people are very much more out of touch with nature than they used to be. It's sad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, was there anything else besides the experience with the kestrel that got you interested in the sport, or did you really just? I mean, you said that you had stayed interested throughout the rest of the early part of your life, and you didn't get back into it until your mid-30s. But I mean, what was the deciding factor to make you actually say, "Hey, I really want to re-pursue this"?
Well, actually, it's where we're sitting right now, which is this little building that it's this my little man cave thing. we built it back in, my wife and I built it. We designed and built it and got all the permits and all the nonsense that goes along with that back in 1998, I guess it was. And so I spent a whole bunch of time working outdoors, and it was the first time where I was able to, rather than, the progression, like for me was, going from a student to a graduate student to getting my job, which was all encompassing and becoming like this. I work in geosciences. I work as a geologist, geochemist, and it was pretty much my life, And then when we built this thing, I ended up spending like a whole fall working outdoors, and it's like, holy cow, look at that! There's a bird, Oh, look, it's a Cooper's hawk, And we live right here, just east of the Rio Grande Valley on the other side of the Sandia Mountains from Albuquerque, and it's a major migration corridor. And I didn't know it at the time, I was clueless, obviously. But in the fall, there's so many birds that move through here. And one day I was out here working on this building, on this, this place where we are right now, and it was like I heard this racket in this juniper tree over to, on one side of the building. I was like, what the heck's going on over there, And suddenly this towhee flies out of the juniper, and it's like flying right at my head. It's like, what the hell, man? And it's like, and right behind it is a sharp-shinned hawk, a Sharpie. It's like coming right from my face. I was like, holy crap. And it's like, and it went right over my head. And I was just like, stood there, and I was like, what just happened? And it was like, and then it was like the it was like the fuse was lit at that point. And, this was the late 90s, so the web wasn't quite, it's nothing what it's like now. I think I went on Yahoo, that was the big search engine at the time, and typed falconry, and it was like, holy cow, there's all this stuff. You can be a falconer. It's legal. You can get permitted. And that was like, I contacted the state. I found some websites. They said, contact your state, get the falconry packet, this and that. And that was the beginning, the beginning of my getting permitted.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's it's amazing how many guys have those kind of personal experiences also, kind of like the one you just described that gets them into it. And, no matter what the contrast is, from person to person, everybody's got that one little spark. But we've talked about that many times also outside of this podcast for sure. But
sure.
But so I mean, what bird did you end up starting with? Was it a red tail like most people, or something different? Or
yeah, it was a red tail. It was interesting because the state gave me a couple names of falconers who were local, and one of them was Tom Smiley, and I called him up, and Tom was. Tom is a gem of a person, but when he doesn't want to talk to people, he can be a little gruff. And I called him up, and I'm like, "Hey, Tom, how are you? I'm this guy, and I'm really interested in falconry." He's like, "Oh, okay, well, maybe call me back in a week, and we'll talk then." And I was like, "Okay," So it was like a week went by, and here I am, like sweating, and it's like. I called Tom and we talked, and he was really he was just this guy who was like super awesome, and I must have asked some of the right questions, I don't know, but he like says, okay, well on next Saturday I'm going to go out, and this other guy who wants to be who's thinking about becoming an apprentice wants to go out too, so why don't you come out with him? So that was the beginning of like my relationship with Tom Smiley and this other guy, Greg Pinkston. And Tom ended up apprenticing both, or sponsoring both of us at the same time. And to this day, I'm best friends with Greg and Tom. And what was the question?
Yeah, the first bird that you flew.
The first bird, of course. God, I'm sorry. So we started out.
You're fine.
Obviously with so that was like January of 98, or January of 99. And so by the fall of 99, I got all I got my act together, and had a muse, all my equipment, and everything everything ready to go. And sometime in early November of 99, I trapped a red tail, and she was a horse. She's one of the pictures on the wall over there, and she trapped it like 52 2 ounces or something, which for a Western bird is pretty much unheard of. And but she was like, 12 ounces of fat.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say.
Living off of gophers or something.
Right, yeah.
And I flew her for my apprentice years, and we were pretty successful. She caught a bunch of cottontails and a bunch of jackrabbits over 2 years. And I had a really great apprenticeship. I mean, hunting, my buddy Greg, who was, under Tom as an apprentice, he and I would go out on the weekends and literally walk for hours with our birds. And New Mexico, unlike a lot of places where you're starting with a red tail, you're really not, there's not like you're hunting off trees. You pretty much have to hunt them off the fist, and it can be tough because red tails are notoriously not comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
But we it started slow, but we figured it out, and we ended up being pretty successful.
Yeah, no, I'm
not to ring our own bells or whatever, but
well, I mean, there's a lot of people that are, with red tails off the glove. But I mean, ultimately, you want to give your bird the best chance to catch quarry,
for sure.
Obviously for red tails, that's usually out of a tree or off of a tall pole or whatever, but I mean, it's not like it can't be done.
Yeah, no, for certain. I mean, I've only flown a couple of red tails, unlike, and maybe my apprenticeship should continue. Maybe I should fly more, and one day I will, because I see videos of guys on like this guy Connor from California who flies red tails from a soar, and it just blows me away. And someday I really would like to do that, but
we'll all die before we ever get a chance to do everything we want to do.
I know.
I mean, unless we all chip in and start playing Powerball or something and get lucky someday. But I feel you. I mean, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, we've had the conversation how many times already about me whining about wanting to move out here and not being able to. And
sure,
I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah,
but we just have to deal with the hands that play with the hands that we're dealt, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot of the grass is always greener kind of vision too. So it's tough.
That is true. Well, I mean, when did you? We've talked a lot the last couple days about dog stuff as well. But I mean,
sure.
when did the whole group effort and coupling with dogs start to play into or play a factor into everything for you?
Sure, it's a good question. Sometime early in my falconry career, so somewhere in the, I don't know, around 2000 or something like that. I read the book by Steve Bodio called Querencia, and basically it's sort of a memoir of Steve's earlier life, when he moved from Massachusetts to Magdalena, New Mexico, and Steve he moved out here with a crew of dogs, and among them were a couple of sighthounds, and sighthounds are dogs like greyhounds and salukis and Scott deerhounds, and he also had some bird dogs. I think like a couple of Springer Spaniels, I think he had at the time. But he gives some really detailed descriptions of going out and chasing jackrabbits with these dogs. And I think in that book he also talks about maybe chasing, maybe because it's an Arab tradition, or a traditional way of hunting on the Arabian Peninsula with salukis, which are a sighthound, and sacred falcons, and they use them to course. So the dogs chase the hares, and the falcon comes in and does sort of low altitude stooping at the hare and knocks it off its feet, and the dogs pick it up, or one or the other. The hawk catches it or whatever. And Steve talked about that in his book Querencia, and he also talked about a gentleman named Dutch Salmon. And Dutch is also an author like Steve, and Dutch was known in the sighthound world far and wide, from California to Kansas and Minnesota. Dutch is a pretty well-known guy with sighthounds, and Dutch lived down in Silver City, New Mexico. And when my kids were little, around, in the early 2000s, we were down there for spring break, and was like, hey, let's look up this guy Dutch, and he had a bookstore down in Silver City, located at his house, and we went down there, and we just, Dutch and we just sat there and talked about dogs and birds and the relationship over the ages. I was blown away by this guy's knowledge. He was like such an intelligent guy and so, well versed in everything. Like, made me, feel like a kindergarten student. And we talked, and a couple months later, he sent me a letter and said, "Hey, I've got a dog, that I'm not using anymore. Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Sure, I'd love that," And it's like, I made all these decisions without consulting my spouse, my wife Lori, and it's like, "Hey, honey, on Saturday we're all going to take a trip down to Caballo Lake, and which is down like in southern New Mexico, and we're going to meet Dutch salmon down there." And she's like, "Yeah, okay, why?" And I was like, "Well, we're getting another dog." And she was like, "What?" So that was kind of the beginning of the end with me and sighthounds. We got this dog. His name was Badger. He looked very much like a saluki, but he was a long dog, which means he is a combination of like different sighthound breeds. And I don't know, these dogs have some sort of magnetic quality about them. And Badger had some health issues, and he died at a young age. And we got another dog from Dutch, and he was an awesome dog. His name was Chance. And and during the interim, we met some guys who bred salukis, and we got a couple of salukis, and it was the domino effect after that. We ended up going deep into the saluki world after that.
Well, I was pretty fascinated by the history that you told me about the breed, and because I don't really know much of anything outside of, the basic breeds, and
Sure.
then of course Vizslas, which I own.
Yeah,
but
awesome dogs.
I definitely want you to go into some of the history of salukis and some of those other, sight hounds, because I thought it was really cool. I mean, at least
Sure.
what you told me. So
Sure, yeah. Salukis are distributed, or like let's call it the saluki type, or the salukioids, are distributed from sort of northern Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, they've got in like Mali and those areas where the Turigs are, they have a breed called Assoaks, and they're kind of a salukioid. And as you move north and east, you get into Morocco, and they have a breed called Salugi, which, there's some controversy in the Salugi world about exactly the differentiation between them. But Salugis are a salukioid as well. They're a slightly different build and slightly different shape than a saluki, but overall they're the same type. And as you move further east onto the Arabian Peninsula, you get into like salukis. And the Bedouins kept salukis. The Bedouins were very poor herders. I mean, this is hundreds of years before there was oil in the Arabian Peninsula. And, the salukis they had were these Arabian salukis are known for being very light boned, and they might have slight longer hairs on them, where the salukis of northern Africa are smooth coated, they call them. And then as you move, this breed, they call it a breed, and they basically it's been around for upwards of 7,000 years, so it's an ancient breed of dog. Probably a more correct terminology rather than breed is landrace, because this type of dog is distributed all along the Silk Road into China. So, the further east you go, they're basically the same dog. You can see they look the same, but their size varies a little bit. Their proportions are slightly different. Their hair is a different length. Their build's either a little more muscular or not, depending on, if they're in a colder climate or more mountainous climate. And it's just a fascinating study, just like falconry. It's ancient. It's something that goes back to the roots of our being, really. And that whole concept just sort of fascinated me. I didn't really realize it until we started to get into it. It was like, holy cow, I fell face first into something I really wasn't aware of, and look how lucky I am to be here, And so we've we made the great fortune of meeting some really great dogs in our life. I mean, the first 2 salukis we got they're more Arabian type dogs, more of, the Arabian Peninsula type dogs. And subsequently, we've gotten more into dogs which are more Persian. So they come from a little further east, more from Iran, Iraq, Kurdistan, and Turkey. That region of the world, which in prior history was known as Persia. And they're just awesome dogs. I mean, they're not for everybody, certainly, but, they work great with falcons. I mean, you talk to Greg Rayburn and Terrence Wright and these guys and Steve Bodio, they've all done this where they fly their falcons and they chase, the dogs will light out after a jackrabbit and they release their falcon and the falcon chases and makes shallow stoops. And it's just something awesome to see. I tried it for a while, and I was more interested in keeping them separate. So I go out, we have salukis, and I just love going out and running the salukis alone, catching jackrabbits, and it's really intense sport. It's as intense as falconry. Different, and I keep my falconry separate, and I like to fly long wings on ducks, and I've flown a lot of Goshawks, and the cool thing was flying Goshawks with like 1 or 2 salukis, because the neat thing about Goshawks is one day you can go out and fly jackrabbits or bunnies or whatever you want. The next day you can go and catch a duck, and the Goshawk doesn't care, So I could run them with my salukis one day, and the next day I could go and chase quail or chase ducks with them. So that was more my speed,
Sure.
And so, yeah, I don't know. Multiple obsessions are bad. They're dangerous.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Yeah, next thing you know, you find yourself in all kinds of credit card debt and, just debt in general. And, you're having to having to travel around the country, making money to try and get out of it and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I totally understand.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, so as far as going back to the actual breed.
Sure.
Do they know or does anyone know for sure? I mean, if it dates back that far, 6,000-7,000 years, I mean, was it like a lot of other breeds that was evolved somehow or specifically bred, from wolves or something else, or was it its own thing? Was it always did they always exist kind of as their own, breeder species, or does anybody really know? Or
I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, if you look at the distribution of sighthounds around the Mediterranean, from Spain to Libya, and that encompasses this whole area. It's like the islands of Malta and Spain. They have Ibethan hounds, which are sighthounds. They've got these really triangular, big ears that stick straight up, and they're sighthounds. And like Spain has Galgo Español. They're these unbelievably fast dogs with unbelievable stamina. They're incredible animals, and it seems like I don't know I don't know whether they I don't really know much about the very beginnings of whether salukis and the sighthounds around that region, where they originated from. But there are, from region to region, as you move more towards Europe, there are definite distinctions in them, but yet they're all sighthounds. So it's a good question. I mean, you can go back and there's, I think Steve Bodio's book about hounds, his recent one, he's got a bunch of photographs in there, and there's this really nice photograph of a petroglyph.
Yeah, he showed me that the other day. Yeah.
And, it clearly shows this hound with lop ears and a curled tail, which is pretty diagnostic of a saluki type dog, So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's fine. I just wasn't sure if they were, a combination of selective breeding from other types of dogs, and they eventually, got what they wanted in these dogs, and then, like I said, I'm pretty ignorant with the history of this breed, so.
My opinion is that they couldn't afford to have dogs that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So they only bred dogs that did work, and these were the dogs that ultimately resulted. And where exactly that happened, I mean, you can go and you can talk to saluki people, saluki aficionados, and I think they would come to blows on whether it was the Arabian Peninsula or Northern Africa or Persia or further east. I don't know. I really, it's nearly impossible to say, I would say.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's fine. Like I said, I know the history of the breeds that I've had personal experience with and had in the past, but yeah, I mean, like I said, it's interesting finding out the history of a lot of these different, especially the sight hounds, from the Middle East and things like that. I just have no familiarity with it whatsoever. Sure. So
yeah, I'm just learning.
Yeah,
I'm a student.
Yeah. Well, and so I mean, you're also, I guess we could go ahead and bring up the, the club that you're also involved in, with the, that you're trying to get the podcast started with.
Oh,
and
sure,
that kind of stuff. So go ahead and talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah. So the salukis are kind of unique in that, everyone's familiar with the American Kennel Club, the AKC, and how they have had their effects on different breeds of dogs, usually for the worse, because dogs get bred for show. I mean, a great example is the German Shepherd. There's that. You could Google it and find like photographs of German Shepherds from like the 1900s through today, and you can see how they've gone from like having a nice horizontal top line and relatively square build to have this really sloping top line, and the dog's so exaggerated. There's no way it could, do its original function. So the saluki world is, to kind of mitigate that, there's a lot of salukis still in their country of origin. So the Middle East is a place that's a political hotbed and is really, things get destroyed when there's wars. And there's, starting back in the 60s when the oil boom in the Arabian Peninsula, people started bringing salukis over to this country, and they wanted to, show them and hunt them. There's organized hunting events that we do, but they had to be registered somehow. So this secondary registry outside of the AKC was formed called the Desert Bred Registry. Okay, so there's dogs could be brought over, and they would be critiqued by people who were performance judges, people who knew how these dogs should run in the field, and people who were show judges who were familiar with the conformation. And so you could bring a dog over and you get 3 critiques done on the dog, and they would be entered into a stud book. So it's basically a stud book. It's called the Society for the Perpetuation of Desert Bred Salukis. It's a mouthful, the SPDBS.
Rolls right off the tongue.
Rolls right off the tongue, exactly. So this was kind of established in the 60s, and the breed club in the United States, which is the Saluki Club of America, accepted their registry, and they therefore were able to allow it to be entered through the AKC. So if you bring a dog over from let's say Kurdistan or Turkey or something like that, tomorrow, if you were to go over there and fly over and pick up a dog and bring it back, you could get it critiqued, and then you could breed it to a saluki that's here, and then the puppies would be called Generation 1 puppies. Then you need to get 2 more generations, and the 3rd generation could be, they go through all this critique process. Every generation goes through the critique process. And then the 3rd generation could be registered with the AKC. I mean, there's just a bunch of paperwork that you have to fill out. You take photographs, and you have people, agree that, yes, this is really a saluki, and so on and so forth. But what it does is it keeps an avenue open in the saluki stud book with the AKC to bring in fresh blood. So most stud books are closed. So I think there may be avenues to bring in like dogs from Africa for, I can't think of the name of the breed now. They're little hunting dogs. Basenjis.
Okay, yeah.
For Basenjis.
Mm-hmm.
Basenjis are pretty fierce little dogs.
Yeah, I know a couple people that have part Basenjis.
Yeah,
yeah, they're very
intense,
very dog aggressive.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be a serious person. You have to be an experienced dog person to deal with them.
Very, very dog dominant for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and there's an avenue to bring that. I mean, they have a similar sort of agreement where their breed allows that to happen. But there aren't very many breeds that allow new blood to be brought in outside of the stud book. So that it's kind of an outsider thing in the saluki world. A lot of the established saluki people don't really, they would never breed to a desert bred dog just because they don't think, they don't have any use for it, I guess.
I got you. Well, that's cool. I mean, thanks for sharing some of that history. Like I said, it's a lot. So whenever you have something that dates back 6,000-7,000 years, it's something that's kind of hard to
it is
kind of hard to condense. But
it is.
Yeah. Well, I guess this would be a good time to go ahead and do like we usually like doing, and have you share one of your favorite hunting stories or experiences with one of your favorite birds or whatever the case may be.
Wow. Yeah. I can tell you a story about going out with my goshawk, Frida. She was a big female New Mexico goshawk that I imprinted. I pulled her out of a nest down in southern New Mexico, sort of near the region where the mythical Apache goshawks come from. And she was a beast of a bird. She was a big bird. She flew at like 1,050 grams. And but I used to take her out. I had we used to have a English setter named Annie, and one of our first salukis, his name was Rupert. And I remember this, Lori and I, my wife and I, were out in this place that we call the gravel pit. It's an old abandoned gravel pit, and it's full of weird little terrain because it was excavated in different ways, and it hadn't been used in years, and it had all kinds of sagebrush and chamisa and lots of prairie grass and stuff growing around. It was a great place to go hunting. It was just sort of this big maze area. It was really fun to get in there and search for bunnies and jacks, and I remember this one really well. But yeah, we were out there hawking, and it was getting late because I typically hawk in the afternoon because of my job, and it was probably in the winter sometime. I don't remember. There's no snow or anything, but we're walking back, and the setter put up a jackrabbit, and it was running crosswise to the direction we were going, and Rupert, the saluki, just like got on its butt and was like hauling ass, and right behind it, and Frida comes in like at an angle and is like right behind Rupert, and it's just sort of like pumping, and she's like behind Rupert, and at one point she just if you've ever flown goshawks like in cover, sometimes they lift their head up. It's like a periscope, and you can see them. They look, and then they make a decision at that point. And she put her head up, and she's looking at the jackrabbit, and she just poured the speed on and just like went right past the dog and like grabbed the rabbit, and it was just like this big ball of dust and grass flying in the air, and she and the jackrabbit and the two dogs like were all in this big rolling ball of animals, and you know the dogs stepped back and she had control of the rabbit, and boom, it was just like, you know, it was just one of those kind of really brief things, one of those little magical moments that happens when you're out there and, you know, you get to see something that no one else has ever seen before. You know, it was just sort of magic.
Yeah, one of those nice Zen moments when everything actually happens like it's supposed to.
Exactly. 1 out of 10,000.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, sadly enough, that's probably the real odds. But well, I mean, is there anything that you want to add here at the end? You know, on behalf, or just mention something about, you know, the state club, or anything else that you want to mention as far as imparting words of wisdom as well?
Words of wisdom. Oh, wow. Man, you're asking the wrong guy. I can go back to Tom Smiley, who's been my mentor in many ways over the years. You know, the first thing that Tom ever taught me was, you know, it's like he gave me my first peregrine, and it was my first bird after when I turned general, and it was an eyas that he had raised and turned sort of into a screamer. And he, you know, one of the things that he said, and this is another word of wisdom, was that, you know, life's too short to deal with a screaming bird. So he gave this little tiercel peregrine to me, and I was totally enamored of this bird, but I was, you know, scared out of my mind to fly it. And he's like, well, you know, he gave me certain steps to follow, you know, train it to the lure and let it kill a couple pigeons, and, you know, be ready with, you know, pigeons in your pouch that it can catch and so forth. And he said, but above all, you have to trust your training, you know, and that's something that I've held close to me. And it's something that I've sponsored a few people, and it's like, you know, when you're going out there, you need to trust yourself and trust that you've trained the bird, you know, and if you don't trust your training, then maybe you need to go back and rethink what you're doing, you know?
Yeah. And
then the second piece of advice he gave me was never throw your last pigeon. Which if you've flown, you know, and I fly a lot of long wings, and that one is the truth. Never, ever throw your last pigeon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, those are my only words of wisdom.
Cool. Well, I mean, I appreciate the, you know, you getting hold of me, and I am really glad that you decided to hit me up. What was it? Gosh, how many months ago was it now? Like 4, 5, 6 months ago,
like that, yeah.
Asking for advice about, you know, some of the podcast stuff. And
yeah.
I hope that what little knowledge that I imparted on you helped with that as well. But
it's been hugely helpful.
But at the same time, you know, I appreciate the, you know, the whole, you know, club being willing to have me down and you know, do these series of episodes for you guys, and I hope that everybody will be happy and get you know, something out of it. So, like I said, I really appreciate, you know, also you know, hosting me and for the hospitality of the last couple of days too.
Oh,
so.
Yeah, no, it's been a joy. I mean, I'm so happy to get some of these guys documented who they're kind of under the radar, but they've contributed in a huge way that, you know, the younger generation really doesn't know about. Mm-hmm. You know, guys like Madison and Matt Mitchell and Tom and and Greg Rayburn. You know, I mean, going out there and you know, he's doing it every day with his bird and his dogs catching rabbits, and it's you know, they're legends that people need to recognize, and I really think that it's I'm just so happy that Falconry Told exists, that there's a way to do this now where, you know, you can go from state to state. I'm sure that you can get these same stories in every state you go to.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
And not, I mean, some people are more willing to share than others, and I get it.
Yep.
I mean, ultimately, I just hope that somebody gets something from something, that we do.
There's no question.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be from us. I mean, I really just am, really happy to be able to continue to kind of help people share these stories that want to share them.
Yep.
And, to be, kind of another avenue for that. And
Sure.
anybody else that wants to share their stories however they want to share them with whoever they want to share them, I mean, go forth and prosper. I really think that everybody can get something out of these experiences that other people have. So
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, with today's technology, I mean, we need to really celebrate falconry in America, and I really think you guys are leading the charge on that.
Well, I mean, I appreciate it, and it doesn't have to be just us. Anybody else's. I mean, to be honest, anybody can do their own thing now. I mean,
Yeah.
the resources are there if you just want to put the time, effort, and energy into it. But I appreciate the props and the sentiment, and hopefully we can continue to do this for some other clubs too. I mean, we'd love to.
Definitely.
But yeah, no. I mean, any other last words before we finish up here? Or?
No.
That's the most amazing.
It's more than I've talked in a month. It's like the only time I ever talked this much is for work.
That's awesome. I just love no, that's great.
I'm done.
All right. Well, I think then that would be a good note to end it on, unless you can think of anything else.
No,
and it doesn't sound like you can.
No,
So
I'm good. No, this was great. Thank you so much for coming out. I really didn't want to be interviewed, but
well, you're going to be. So yeah, whether you liked it or not in this situation,
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's all good. Well, all right. Well, thank you again, and let's go have another beer.
Okay, sounds great, John. Thank you.
All right.